Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Living on the Edge. This week on the program, why captive breeding may not be good enough to save this majestic animal from extinction. The story behind the gorgeous cotton textiles that have made India the envy of the world, and how our actions support the second largest illegal trade in the world. India is home to half the world's surviving tigers that are teetering on the brink of extinction. And yet, poaching, habitat loss, and our inability to protect the animal even in sanctuaries are a sad indictment of our conservation efforts that kicked off with so much fanfare. Today, the tiger population is dwindling so rapidly that the government has signed a protocol with China to begin a captive breeding project. And yet, this path is fraught with many difficulties and could create more problems than it can solve. Sunil Manoharan reports.
A 16th century encyclopedic book about Chinese medicine has the following entry. It says tiger bones are good for curing bad ulcers, rheumatic pains in the joints and muscles, typhoid and malaria. For rheumatic swelling of bones, the book recommends a bath in tiger bone broth. It also says powdered tiger bone should be applied to burns and eruptions under the toenail. Centuries later, this is yet to be proved by science and research. The problem is, the Chinese still believe it. As a result, 3 of the 8 species of tigers are now extinct. The Bali tiger became extinct in the 1940s, the Caspian tiger in the 1970s, and the Javan tiger in the last decade. In China, there are only about 50 tigers left in the wild. Desperate situations call for desperate measures. That's why the Chinese government has now begun a breeding program.
The tiger farms were set up based on the argument that if you raise tigers like you raise chickens and sort of slaughter them and sell their body parts to the Chinese medicine trade, somehow it relieves pressure on the wild tiger populations.
The other reason is to release the captive bred tigers in the wild, but experts question the wisdom of such moves.
The reason is that the tigress looks after her cubs for 2 years. She trains her cubs to hunt, to survive, and with full devotion of a mother, with the love, affection and training, she creates a cub into one of the most majestic predators, the greatest hunter that the jungle system knows.
In fact, never in the history of wildlife conservation has this majestic predator been successfully reintroduced into his natural habitat. This is despite the fact that zoos all over the world are overflowing with captive-bred tigers.
The tiger from a zoo that is reintroduced into the wild without training is like a big dog. He can be killed by anything. It's the mother who shows the cub the language of the forest, which are the paths to walk on, which are the water holes to go to, how the prey species distributes itself, the seasonal changes. It's like saying that you can introduce someone from a village in Bihar to a village in Africa.
What this really means is that a tiger who once enjoyed food on demand isn't equipped to track and hunt the usual prey of tigers bred in the jungle. Experts have found that captive-bred animals are unable to use their paws the way nature had in mind. That's why tigers released into the wild turn to easier options: cows, buffaloes and goats, of which there's no shortage in and around our national parks. And sometimes in desperation they even turn to man. And yet, despite the dismal record of captive breeding, the government has signed a protocol with China which aims to encourage on an experimental basis captive breeding activities with a view to release the species into the wild.
Well, I think it's a very undesirable article which suggests that there should be a program for breeding tigers for experiments in release in the wild.
So why experiment when we have plus 3,000 tigers? We have the forests, we have the tigers, they are breeding, they have a lot of problems, populations are decreasing, but let's put all our united effort into protecting the field, into field action. That's what's critical.
This may prove difficult as wildlife preservation itself is low on the agenda of national politics. Only too often are national parks and sanctuaries denotified to pave way for mines and industries. For instance, the Melghat Tiger Reserve was to be denotified by 33%, but this has been stayed by a court order. Other parks like the Manas Tiger Reserve and the Dachigam National Park are under siege by militants. Moreover, interference in the day-to-day affairs of the Forest Department affects the morale of the staff.
To my experience, I think one of the major interferences come in the form of manipulation or interventions in postings and transfers of wildlife and forest officials. You see, the moment this becomes a political process, a man is posted to protected areas or a key task, not because he is the best one available for the job, but he is there, he has the highest political clout.
In fact, the only real support tiger and wildlife conservation attracts is from the law itself. The 1991 amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 provides enhanced punishment for violations.
I think the legislation as it exists is very good. What I would like to see is the courts take much more seriously the whole matter of wildlife conservation. It's not just a question of tigers. The prey of the tiger is being poached, and this obviously affects the tiger directly.
Given the vastness of our country and the environmental problems we face, living on the edge can be a means of focusing national attention on areas of concern. That's why if there's anything about the environment that makes you angry or sad or even happy, write to us at Living on the Edge, Post Box number 269, New Delhi 110001. Many of our stories are prompted by viewer letters, and we want to make this series as interactive as possible. Our next item is a report by Tisha Srivastava from Ahmedabad, the Manchester of India's cotton industry. Although many of us don't realize it, the cotton shirts, saris and textiles we use are created, at least in the initial stages, by workers toiling in horrific conditions. Cotton dust pollution is destroying their lungs, their health and their lives. And yet the textile mills where they work don't consider themselves accountable.
It's another wretched Monday morning. You look at your clock and sigh. And then take a deep breath and just get on with the first working day of the week. Now let's meet Hari Bhai from Ahmedabad. His Monday morning routine is practically the same as yours, except for one thing.
कभी खांसी आती है तो कभी कभी तो ऐसा शरीर एकदम खींच जैसा हो जाता है, अंधेरा जैसा हो जाएगा, फिर आने ऐसा होगा कि जैसे अब आंख बंद जैसे हो जाएगी.
He can barely breathe. In fact, for 15 to 20 days in a month, he's unable to even get up to go to work. He just coughs incessantly like a TB patient, gets blackouts and becomes so breathless that he can't walk and breathe at the same time. This Monday sickness or bisonosis, as it is medically known now, is the result of his working in a cotton textile mill where he has been inhaling cotton dust for the past 30 years. Now, cotton, that soft fluffy material, is the last thing anybody would ever associate with dust, right? Wrong. Because raw cotton picked from the field is full of trashy leafy stuff that irritates, just like the asthma nurturing pollen. When we think of polluted work environments, what crosses our minds are coal mines and chemical industries. The manufacture of cotton textiles doesn't even vaguely cross our minds. But thousands of textile workers in Ahmedabad are slowly dying of a lung disease called bisonosis. If we go behind the making of finished cotton textiles, we find that there are 3 departments that cause maximum harm to workers. Let's take you through these 3 stages. We are right now in the blow room, in which cotton is being passed through mechanical beaters. All that dust and dirt is removed from the cotton and is beaten into a sheet. The working conditions, as you can see, are musty and the machines have no exhausts, a basic safety prerequisite. We now go on to carding, a killer department, where these sheets are opened into small fibers and loose rope. Dust flies out from every small fiber here. In fact, about 40% of all bisonosis cases happen here, including Haribhai's. This thin rope has zigzag fibers which are then straightened out and twisted on these bobbins. Then the yarn is made and processing of the cloth follows. The workers involved in each of the stages of the spinning department are constantly taking in this dust. The high speed of the machines spits out cotton dust at them faster, and inhaling this over a period of anything between 8 to 20 years sparks off an allergic reaction in the lungs. Earlier, when Haribhai and the 1.25 lakh textile mill workers around the country like him used to go to the doctor with their problem, they were treated as asthma, bronchitis or TB patients. And when one realizes that the cotton industry in Ahmedabad, the Manchester of India, dates as far back as 1861, the mind boggles at the number of workers who may have been misdiagnosed. After all, in Ahmedabad, no doctor had a clue what bisonosis was all about until 1987. Until Dr. J.R. Parekh of the National Institute of Occupational Health, Ahmedabad, analyzed the work environment. He found that the level of cotton dust was at least 3 times higher than the permissible level. Not only that, it became clear how bisonosis consumes the workers' bodies.
ना मैं लेट सकूं, ना बैठ सकूं, ना खड़ा रह सकूं, ऐसी हालत में दवाखाने में ले गए.
The breathing capacity is so reduced that he may become permanently disabled. What makes all this worse, even tragic, is that the affliction is incurable. The worker becomes prone to other respiratory problems and needs to be shifted from his department if he has to survive. In some cases, the worker dies young. As we found out on meeting the widow of Chawan Bhai, a worker in the carding department of Jahangir Mills, who passed away of bisonosis 6 months ago. Compensation after death, after a body has slowly wasted away, makes you wonder whether workers have to go through hell in their lifetime to get justice after they die. And yet, that's not all. The compensation procedure is itself a bureaucratic nightmare. Though bisonosis is a notified disease under the Factories Act 1948, and the suffering worker can claim compensation under the Workmen's Compensation Act 1923, but for that, a pulmonary function test has to be done and the percentage of bisonosis identified.
You see compensation as a solution?
No, it's not a solution. It is evidence that there is a disease. You see, otherwise they will not give the compensation unless there is a disease, and ESIs will not pay for that.
मंडे को पहले दिन आया तो उसे काफ़ी मतलब कमजोरी होगी, सांस चढ़ेगी, टाइटनेस रहेगा और वो काम नहीं कर सकेगा, तो रियली ऑफिसर उसको डांटेगा, ऐसी तरह तरह की यातनाएं जब आंसर देगा तो वर्कर बगैर रिटायर्ड किए भाग जाएगा मिल से। इनके घर में कोई कदर नहीं होती। लोग बोलते हैं तुम खांसता पड़ा रहता है, तुम ये करते वो करते हो, इसलिए सामाजिक स्तर इनका नहीं है। एक्चुअली बीसिनोसिस वर्कर को ये डिसीज हो गई, ये सिद्ध हो गया, तो उसकी पूरी लाइफ की जवाबदारी मैनेजमेंट और कॉर्पोरेशन की होती है, उनको उठाना चाहिए।
But at least for Hari Bhai, who earns just 2,000 rupees a month, after 30 years of working, his medical bills are taken care of. When living on the edge contacted Jahangir Mills and the factory inspectorate, we found them unwilling to talk. At Kaisar-e-Hind, this is what the management had to say.
Any workers here have businesses?
Not that I am aware of. We have taken sufficient, mask and other things are provided to the workers so that it takes care of that.
Diplomacy with media, suppressing facts, what do you call that? And yet that's not all.
Cotton textile industry is not really very much of health hazard. It's not a chemical industry or mining industry.
Answers such as these have only convinced workers that they've got to stand up for themselves. And with the support of Dr. Parekh, solutions are beginning to emerge. Workers are holding meetings with co-workers, NGOs and doctors to increase awareness. They're pushing for a local medical board that can award compensation and pressurizing the management to ensure basic safeguards. Dr. Parekh, on the other hand, has found a novel solution. He says that if cotton is picked in the correct manner, all leafy trash can be left behind. This makes the cotton free of any dust and makes for better cotton as there are no breakages in yarn. But is anybody listening? The management of the mills may just have to, because the workers of textile centers across the country have started getting together to fight for better working conditions, the legislation to enforce it, and in a sense, for the right to live. After all, human life is not a cheaply available, finished product.
The problem with cotton dust pollution is that most of us feel there's nothing we can do to stop it. And yet the spread of awareness is the first step towards putting things right. For instance, how many of us are aware that it's our buying habits that fuel the second biggest illegal trade in the world? That each time we buy a tiger-based aphrodisiac, a fur coat or even a snakeskin belt, we are fueling a trade that thrives on the large-scale killing of animals, and that it's our spending habits that are pushing hundreds of creatures to extinction. Most of us pay lip service to conservation, but as Nandini Rajware found, it isn't good enough.
It is 6:30 on an early summer's morning in Delhi. We are accompanying the wildlife warden on a raid in the Jama Masjid area. Within a span of 30 minutes, over 2,000 rare birds, including 1,400 parakeets, banned from being traded in or even kept as pets, are seized. We also discovered 2 black bucks, a protected species under the Wildlife Act. But raids such as these are not always successful. Despite the ban on exporting, trading, killing and poaching of wild animals, illegal exports continue and contribute significantly to the global wildlife trade, which is estimated at $20 billion annually. The minimum declared value of the world bird trade is $44 million. 500,000 parrots and parakeets enter the global trade annually. Only 1 out of 3 birds caught for trade survives. Those figures relate to birds, but if you take wildlife trade as a whole, it is second only to the illegal trade in narcotics. And India continues to be a major supplier despite laws to the contrary.
The Wildlife Protection Act is a powerful law. Unfortunately, its application is weak. We do not have enough forces in the field. We do not have an intelligence gathering mechanism, and our legal structure is faulty in the sense that people can commit offenses, they can get bail easily, and the hearing does not come up for 8 years and 10 years.
Delhi is, the central, you can say as a marketing arena. From here the consignments are sent through the international market. It is lucrative, there is a lot of money involved in it, there is a great demand for this.
The greatest demand comes from Europe, China, Taiwan, US, Canada and Singapore. The exorbitant prices demanded by suppliers and the ability of affluent customers to pay those prices imply that ways and means can be found to subvert international controls. The results are apparent in South Asian countries where wildlife species are teetering on the brink of extinction as human predators prepare to mop up what survives. India, with more than half the world's wildlife, is unfortunately an ideal hunting ground. By the turn of the century, rhinos, tigers and Asian bears may well be extinct. Every part of this majestic creature's body is food for wildlife traders. Its skin for coats, its bones and skull for medicinal purposes. Experts say that the last of the wild tigers will disappear in less than a decade. Killed for ivory, this animal is transformed by man into bangles, statues and carved tusks. The use of ivory is banned in India, but the illegal trade continues. Rhino horn is used in China and Taiwan to treat paralysis, high blood pressure and body aches. Of the 1900 rhinos alive today, 1500 are in India. The question is, can we save them? The gentle, shy and harmless musk deer has been hunted incessantly for decades. The reason? It carries musk, used in perfumes and cosmetics worldwide. And finally, the belts, wallets, shoes and leather accessories many of us use come from reptile skins. That is another huge market, both within and outside the country.
The use of wildlife by man is as old as history itself. From time immemorial, mankind has met its needs of clothing, food, and very many medicines from using wild flora and fauna.
The cure actually lies in preventing it where the actual killing takes place. Nobody puts human skulls, human skins around in their showrooms and their houses.
Think about it. Would the fragrance of an aftershave or perfume seem as delicious as it does if you were to remember that a musk deer had to be killed to make it? Or would the illegal wildlife trade survive if it didn't have us to sustain it? Or would birds be captured and sold if we didn't want them as pets? Or would we really feel terribly cold if we did without fur coats? Think about it.
The total number of people reached 1 billion in 1825, and it took about 2 million years to reach this level. The next billion was added in only 100 years by 1925.